Hello, today is May 2nd, 2019. This is the conformance subproject of SIG Arch. The reason why this is a kind of a one-off meeting, the reason why I requested this particular meeting was we don't often get the folks who are from Globit working on the actual promotion of the intent tests inside of the standard meeting. So I wanted to have a separate discussion with them to see what issues they were kind of running into. We could also have a standard set of status updates and other things at the end of this discussion. But I do know that there's been a couple of blocking issues for a while. So I wanted to get their take before we get into anything else about what they see as the biggest obstacles. How can we help facilitate and expedite their work, because they're the people that are doing most of the work right now.
Right. Essentially, we talk about how we analyze things and how we improve the process on a weekly basis. I would let Mayank speak about it, but because of the silence I picked up here. Essentially, every week we talk about what ETE tests we can promote, taking that low-hanging fruit, and next we see the gaps in the ETEs which we can start writing tests. And sometimes we run into behaviors that hard to test. It takes a while. For example, like one the team did it a few months ago was figuring out how the pre-stop and post-stop hooks work. There was a behavior that the weight was not ported to run C. We did not know about that. So there was a case where post-hop hook was not working, and it took us a while to figure out why these E2E tests are not behaving. This behavior gap is not tested in the E2E tests. So there is a lot of research as well as a lot of time is spent on those things. We should optimize it, but none of the normal community effort is there to improve the E2E test coverage or the behaviors. So that is also part of the reason why we are spending more time on those aspects. And anything else I missed?
Mayan, do you care to chime in here?
Hi, Srini. Hi, team. So the major area what we are focusing on, like definitely the promotion, but the biggest challenges are like currently the Windows environment, because whether the test would be successful on the Windows environment or not, and what kind of the counter actions can we take, right, in terms of setting up the Windows cluster on the machine, try executing them, or any other aspect of them. And other part of it, like what kind of the different functionality should we actually keep on analyzing, because the current way is definitely we have picked up the pod spec and the different properties out of there. But again, like these are dependent on the other important components like the service accounts or the other spec files. So how should we keep on promoting these kind of the E2Es? So majorly the guidance on those aspects.
Okay, so the first one, the Windows one, what exactly can we do to help unblock you there? I do know that the Windows folks they have a separate ability to, and we added this, they have a separate ability to kick a Windows test job, but it's not part of the default PR blocking jobs. And I believe they updated the instructions for the main conformance promotion. So are you able to access that now when you're trying to do promotions?
Especially the agent host image?
They're currently working on that one. So that one is currently in flight. And I know DIMS has been involved in the reviews for that one.
Mm-hmm. So no, currently we do not have access to that, but definitely like especially on the agent host, again, it's kind of the major things to discuss, like what exact things should we start including inside the agent host image. Like if we talk about the something like the wget-t flags, which are not supported on Windows, and if we try to replace them with the curl, so again there would be like the system level or the system level dependencies are there. Some flags would be supported and some would not be. So instead of trying using those kind of the package, is it possible to rely on the Golang based libraries, like especially to make HTTP calls and try to get data? So like creating the own binaries or some kind of the library functions to invoke.
I wouldn't be opposed to that so long as it's scope bounded and it actually reduces the state space of things that are needed. Dims, I saw you turn your camera on.
So sorry, I missed the part where you said you're blocked on the Windows test. Can you explain a little bit why you're blocked?
Suppose if we are trying to promote any E2E to conformance, we are not sure whether those E2E would be successful on the Windows or not, because from the test grid, only few of the E2Es are listed over there on the Windows jobs that have record that these are running on the Windows or not, but not all the E2Es.
Right. So I think you should leave it up to the Windows team to suggest improvements and not worry too much about the Windows side at this point. And we do have the Linux only tag now, right? Linux only tag we are using with conformance as well, right? So let's just, your team should not worry about the Windows stuff at this point, because that's a whole big can of worms. And there are a lot of people on their side trying to work that out. But what you can do is create issues for when you're working on something and you see something could be a problem. Just create an issue for them and assign it to the SIG Windows. Assign it to their SIG, essentially saying that this is a conformance. This is going to be a problem for you next time. And I'll send you the names of a couple of people, Patrick Lang and who else? Claudio. They are working on the stuff. Basically, give them a heads up that you're going to face this in the future. But then you do what you have to do to continue your work, because it's not going to get any easier. Aaron.
Yeah, sorry. Like, I feel like what you're telling Mayank to do is to add the Linux only tag to any test that he promotes and not bother figuring out whether or not it works on Windows. I feel like right now, when we promote a test, there's this consternation from the Windows folks. They're like, hey, like, you shouldn't add the Linux only tag, or you should, or whatever. So I feel like, and this is cool, I'm just making sure the mechanics of it sound good to everybody.
Right. We can all
create a backlog of Linux only tests, and then it would be up to Windows to chew through removing the Linux only tag from all of those things.
So we can ask for the reviews too, right?
Yeah, let's pause for a second here. Maya, do you know that there is a ability to kick the end-to-end suite from your PR job that will run a Windows test?
No, not sure about the exact job name, but definitely like if we raise the PR, different jobs are running. Not sure about this.
So it's kind of a mechanics problem. Like the promoters are not aware that there's the ability to kick a Windows end-to-end test for that promotion. And I don't know whether or not we have a lot of PR blocking jobs, so I'm a little bit hesitant to want to promote a Windows PR blocking job, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I'm looking at Dims and Aaron in particular for feedback on that.
That's a longer conversation about whether or not it could be moved to blocking. It should adhere to certain criteria, which still have yet to be documented. But essentially, I would want to see it run as non-blocking for some sustained period of time to gather data to see whether or not it makes sense to block. But there's a whole other question of making sure we're not monotonically blocking everything. Yeah, but I do think there actually is a job that you can trigger.
Yeah, and so as part of the feedback loop, Ryan, we updated the documentation to say, as part of the promotion process, that you should submit if Windows is going to be applicable to this test, you should put in your submission at the very end the kicker for the Windows job, and it should be able to report to you whether or not Windows was supported.
Okay. So the basic part of what we are using now is, like, first of all, analyzing the E2E thoroughly, and what kind of the properties and the behavior are they following, and then if they are eligible for the promotion, we just promote it. But the thing happens, like, most of them are again on the review phase, just because the different kind of the waiting phases. Like one of them was the Windows, whether it's running on Windows or not. So the thing is that we are not sure, like, what would be the ultimate result, whether it would be successful or the fail. But all the efforts, like analyzing and the promotion, took step and on the first site. So, and also like even on the promotion, like what time is it taking, flakiness, all these things. So but as based on your suggestion, definitely we should focus the behavior, and whether it's running on the Windows or not, that's the second priority. And on the GitHub issues, we can have the detailed discussion on that.
I wanted to get your feedback on a question I had with regards to, you have this issue open with regards to the 2 bullet point criteria with regards to monitoring events and node condition messages. And there's a lot of tests that are like that. And I asked Brian repeatedly, multiple times on multiple occasions, to give guidance for what the expectations are for the behavior that they want, what he expects, given that we have a sort of implicit state machine versus an explicit one. So how many tests do you think that blocks you on currently? Like a swag. I've counted on the order of close to 100 tests that have this behavior in them.
Yes. So on the E2E suits, I came across around 30 to 40, which are directly or indirectly using the messages and status. But most of them are relying on like those tests which are verifying the failure behavior. They generally utilize these messages and state to check whether the failure was due to that specific reason, like that.
Okay.
Especially on the failure cases, the messages are verified. So,
all right. So that gives me more information I can feed back to Brian to try and get him to write down what the expectations are, because the problem is, if they're trying to check a failure condition, it becomes very difficult to do if you're not checking the actual message itself, because the errors and the failure conditions are not enumerated for a given release.
Very true. So again, like I was going through the design documentation, and it was mentioning like we should check against the different types of the messages what are getting written, and the state of them, like whether it's they are succeeding or the failing. That's it. We should not rely on the messages. But again, like there are tons of the failure reasons if you are not verifying them, so it would be of very less preciseness.
Okay, that's good feedback. I will take that and use that. The other question I had for you is, I talked with Srini about automating some of the project board maintenance. So if it says area project, it gets put into the project. Is there, while Aaron is here, is there a bot command to add it to the project? Nope.
I feel like I'd like Srini and Hippie to talk to that. As far as I know, they're still working on that automation.
Yeah, actually, I started fixing the project plugin right now, and there are quite a few issues with all the commands. Create, move, and clear commands. So I fixed all of them. I have pushed PRs. One PR at least is outstanding right now. There are 2 more coming in today. After that, I will be concentrating more on the project manager, because the base methods that we need are all now tested. We should be able to. I pushed the PR for project manager, but then the additional functionality to handle issues and so on and so forth, I'll have to add them.
So just to be clear, you're saying there is a plugin called Project. At least I can search for the word project here, and I see it exists, and it looks like it claims it supports a /project command. Are you saying there are other commands that plugin supports?
Project has 3 commands. /project with the on the issue, you can say /project, the column name, and add the issue to the column, or you can move the issue between columns, or clear the issue from that project board. So all these are tested. But Hippie Hacker gave me an environment last week, so I've been testing these plugins on that environment, and now we both are working on it, and then we have all these plugins tested, but there's a lot of code changes because the code was not working. So I have 1 PR outstanding right now. I'll post it in the chat quickly. And then there are 2 more PRs coming in for the create and the clear commands. So.
Please post this in the meeting notes. Please do not use chat, because chat is considered ephemeral. Okay. So if you want to do hot takes in chat, go ahead. Cat emojis, whatever you feel like. But if it's useful content, please put it in the meeting notes.
Absolutely. And as soon as these PRs are in, I will be working on the project manager plugin, which is automated way of pushing issue of the project board. So.
Hi, is the problem that people on this call don't have access to the project board?
No, the problem is that when PRs get posted or issues get created and they have the label area conformance, that doesn't go to the project board. It requires Mechanical Turk, that's me or Aaron, that actually goes through periodically and literally assigns the project board, because we have rights or ACLs, and then kind of shuffles it throughout the board. So
right. But then the problem there is we need a bot that looks for the area conformance and updates a board directly, right? This is the plugin where you have to type it in to actually kick it off.
Yes, and that was the original request that I asked Srini to work on. So I think if it doesn't matter as long as there's process. So if the person, ideally it would be just a label and auto do it, but if they have a process to add it to the board, that would be helpful too. I think in the meantime, until we have clear guidance and any PR updates, feel free, Mayan, to just assign at Timothy SC. And I'll use that as routing, because assigning is the only way I can manage Kubernetes things. If I'm assigned to something, I'll take a look at it. If it's a notification, it's somewhere in a garbage heap somewhere.
So I dug up a test info issue where somebody asked that for this exact feature a while back. It is marked as stale. Srini, should I be assigning you and Hippie to this issue?
I think I commented, is that the same issue where I commented at the bottom that I moved it out and yeah, please do so if it's not the same one.
Okay, I will remove the stale label, and Srini and Hippie are working on it. Hippie, you are muted for some reason. Like we can't hear you, even though your mic icon is not on.
Yeah, I was saying we've created that new PR, and with we were working through the broken project plugin, and the project plugin is somewhat fixed now. And as soon as that gets through, we can move on to what I think will be a much easier for the broader community as well, is this populate the boards automatically via search queries. That's the project manager board. Project manager plugin versus just a project plugin.
Are there other, I want to make sure we focus while we have the global people here. Are there other issues, questions, problems you have, things we can clear up for you? How do we grease the wheels? What other things besides Windows and sort of general visibility and automation?
Should I take further to discuss like what problems are we facing and the way we are following so that we can have the better guidance, or I can take next?
Yeah, what are the biggest issues besides Windows? You mentioned that was one. I've denoted the automation piece, like, because what happens is I have to go through manually with a couple of different windows because GitHub's fun to make sure that I can actually do the diff of what's actually in the project board. And I was looking at that this morning. What other issues do you think that are high profile that we can, as a collective group, we can help to grease it and make it easier, or to give you guidance to make it easier for you so we can, kind of make this a little bit faster if possible?
Okay. So if we are totally focusing on the conformance promotion, definitely like picking up the priority specs or the components are the first one. Like definitely we started picking up the pod spec, but most of the fields like the toleration, service accounts, so these are the direct properties of the pod spec which are getting covered. But if we go deep down on the service accounts, so again that spec come into the action as a second step, and again verifying the different attributes property and promoting their behavior. Like if we talk about the service accounts, image pull secrets, so whether these properties has been covered inside the E2E with respect to service account is achieved or not. So that is the things for analysis. So after analyzing the service accounts, we found that like the image pull secrets and the secrets are not verified. So during the evaluation process of for the conformance promotion, all these gaps we are finding, so drafting them as a local file system or in the centralized Google Docs, or creating the issue so that the new member or anyone can create writing that E2E. So again, like along with the conformance promotion, we are finding out the gaps of for improving the API coverages. So where can we start adding these gaps as a GitHub issues or the centralized document? And along with that, what different things should we start looking into? So this is one.
Yeah, so definitely add the GitHub issues just so they're tracked. I don't think we could track it any other way. Otherwise, if we have separate docs, it's just too difficult to maintain state over time. So we have the project board, we have the labeling. Once we have the automation, we'll have visibility across everybody. So I think just add the area conformance label and we'll put it into the board. One of the areas that we talked about during the last conformance meeting, which was last week, Thursday, it was the idea of watch behavior, right? You have it as etcd tests inside of the issue, but like that's fundamental to Kubernetes. So identifying key watch behavior, and I think there's a very limited subset of tests that actually do watches. So extrapolating those tests, I do have a question regarding that, if those watches should be using the common patterns, which they probably should, that exist inside the code base. So it wouldn't just be straight API coverage. It'd be using like the libraries and verifying that, those library behavior of the watch hits the API. Does that make sense to you?
Regarding the watch, I have less visibility on that area. So because I was not following on specifically to the watch.
Yeah. I think, as Brian mentioned, pod behavior is first and foremost in identifying those gaps and fixing and filling those. But I think secondary, which was also listed inside of our conversations and somewhere in our notes, was that watch behavior is fundamental to the system, right? So like pod behavior is fundamental in the system and watch behavior is fundamental. So verifying that those two key, I don't know, cornerstones, what do you want to call it, linchpins, are correct across all environments is pretty important.
I got it. Okay.
So I wanted to maybe, what am I trying to say? You talked about the word behavior, and that's kicking loose in my mind that the ideal state for Globant, I feel like, would be to give them a list of behaviors that they should make sure are tested and they should chew through. Where are we on providing that? I feel like what I heard Srini articulate earlier in the meeting was that right now Globant is wandering through the pod spec or the existing set of end-to-end tests to identify what can be promoted. And so it's unclear to me whether, Tim, you're asking that they should be wandering through like another pod spec, or they should be looking for another set of behaviors as they're wandering through E2E tests. You're muted at the moment.
So last time we talked in the very beginning when we started kicking things off is that we have a P0. Our P0 is fixing the pod spec. Right? We didn't ever had like a P1 and an enumerated list of the other things. In our conversation last time at the very beginning is that the next fundamental piece would be watches, right? And then we actually, we need to enumerate that particular list. I think there's still plenty left in PodSpec to go, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that will keep them busy.
I think that's the thing I was reacting to, is to me it still feels like the watch stuff is out of scope at the moment because we have so much to focus on with respect to the PodSpec.
Well, we were looking through the list and if on the project board, and there's a bunch of things that we questioned. Sorry, it's right here. We just need to prioritize all these other things that are listed down here. So there's like tracking issue for all the different behaviors. And all we want to do is at least sort some behavior to the top, right? And we obviously know that PodSpec is the most important one. We don't want to stop that effort. But if in the meantime, if they're looking at other things and evaluating it along the way, because they need to write whole new tests for some of this, right?
Right.
And that's going to be a longer tail and harder thing to do. If they're also looking at watches, that seems like a reasonable thing to do in the interim while creating new tests.
Okay, that's fair. Yep, gotcha.
Hey, Tim.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, actually, I'm the person from Globant using watch. I used in 2 test cases. I used watch. Can I know what are the list of behaviors? I mean, list of behaviors in this?
That's for me to do. Like that's for me to walk through, and by the next conformance meeting to give a concrete list of semantics and behaviors that we kind of expect. I do know that Daniel had mentioned that we have a very limited number of watches that we actually verify across resources. And I do know in the code, because I wrote the code, is that it's separate code paths entirely inside the API server. They back into the main etcd code, but they're separate code paths.
Right. The other context I feel like watch has come up for Globant a couple of times is in making sure that tests are not flaky before they are promoted to conformance. And so I know I've worked through with Pandi a little bit on how do we rewrite a test to make sure that it's not using a watch to get its behavior done. Yeah,
it should be using the code for the informers because that's a much more resilient piece of code.
Right.
Versus a straight up API watch, right?
Right.
And I did see one of those PRs, and I think I approved it, and LGTM'd it.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think we're there. So you're saying if we make sure the tests use informers, does that exercise the code paths that you're talking about, or you're looking for other behavior?
Verifying the informer or the watch behavior across informers across a number of different resources. I think the notion that we need to watch across resources gives you the broader coverage of the API. Because right now we like watch a very finite, limited number of resources versus verifying the behavior of the watch is consistent across the other resources.
So when you talk about watching across resources, for example, there's a test where like we create deployment or something, we delete the deployment, but we actually watch to make sure that the pods got deleted in a cascading effect. Is that the cross-resource thing you're talking about?
That's a good example. That would be a really good one because it sort of shows the behavior exists across all the dependencies in the higher order thing, right? That's actually a great example. Yeah.
That clarified things for me. I hope that was helpful.
So another thing I wanted to get clarity on, like if you are talking about the pod spec to cover most of the cases. So as an example, if I'm picking up the service account, so generally we say that we are using the non-optional fields, especially for the conformance promotion. If fields are optional, we do not promote them. But in the service account, definitely it's an important property. And inside that, we can create the service account without any other properties like the secrets or the image pool secrets or the other properties. Just the name is required. So definitely they are the optional fields. So should we start creating the issue to write or suppose or propose an E2E for these kind of the fields, which can be part of the conformance on the later stages?
Yeah. Yes. If there's a gap in coverage, yes. Yeah. So in general, especially for optional fields, because if we don't actually have that coverage, I think it's more concerning because we have a tendency to cover the things that we know are obvious, and then the behavior could shift or change unexpectedly on things that are not obvious or not forced fields.
Okay. And most of the areas like the create and the list are verified very precisely or at a larger extent, but not the patch and update fields, and also like there are fields like the field manager in the query parameters. So all these things. So again, these are important when we are trying to update the objects. And especially they would be useful on the patching operations and the update operations. So how should we start covering all these aspects like the query parameters, body parameters, and all these aspects of the APIs along with the HTTP verbs? So when we are drafting the E2E in terms of the scenario and the fields?
I think it'd be looking at behavior first. What is the behavior expectations of the things that we are trying to do, and what is the end user operations that we care about the most? I wouldn't go and focus on raw coverage for some things as the primary function, but focus on the standard set of operations that people will do. Update is really common. Patch is really common. I wouldn't go to the extremes of adding just getting the basic coverage for those operations in place first, and then adding optional fields second. But I would not go through the whole extent of it's kind of could be a black hole, right? You could go really deep and wide on given behaviors, but I think the common set of operations of the behaviors that we expect for most consumers to consume should be the driving motivation. So I think what it sounds like, the way I interpret the questions you're asking me is what is the order of evaluation we need to figure out, like to add specific tests. And I think it would help, maybe it should be on us, this group, to basically have a rubric by which we help to, the guidance should be clear, right? The guidance should be, in my opinion, this is my opinion, but other people can chime in and I want their opinions too, is that we should be covering from the end user perspective of what we think should be consistent across providers, right? If a person does an update or patch command, on their cluster, you'd expect that update or patch command to be consistent across 2 different environments. So if we focus on the end user perspective first on what their expectations are and the different scenarios, and we kind of prioritize based upon frequency, I think we can help there. Right? So if there's questions about that, what do other people think?
I like the idea, but overall, if we cannot zone these behaviors, it's hard for us to dig deeper and say, oh, this is tested this way, but not this way, and with these set of parameters, right? So at this point, we do not have that a reference sheet where all these kind of the behaviors we need to test. So what are all the part spec fields or parameters that are being tested as part of those behaviors or not? So it's still very vague to me how to approach what is covered, what is not covered. We don't have that reference sheet to say these are the behaviors that are covered right now.
It's part of the things that we've been using API Snoop to try to get some visibility into. I've got some reports and things we can look at a little bit later around focusing on even our own test suite and all of the, during our conformance and master blocking jobs, all of the untested and unconforming endpoints we hit there and the behaviors we see within it. And we're looking soon to pull in stuff from the kind conformance test and also the CNF test bed as far as some real world, other behaviors that are not part of the tests.
So I think it's on us, probably me in particular, to start to draft a document that helps to make it easier so that way if people can work more asynchronously. Right? I wanted to have this feedback session because I wanted to know what are the problem cases and what are the issues that you're seeing. It's pretty obvious to me that priority sorting independently is difficult. Right? And usually that means that we need to help. We have a document for how to do promotion, but we don't have a document to outline evaluation of criteria of what we think is important.
I feel like we have a lot of bulleted lists that articulate the sorts of things that we want to cover, and we're saying all of those things are P0. What I don't think we have is a list of behaviors. All of the automated coverage mechanisms that we could jam together, whether it be API Snoop right now with verb and path, whether it be taking that further and looking at all of the fields that are set for every resource with every verb, with every path, whether it be every line of code that is actually hit as a result of these tests. None of those things actually describe whether or not a given behavior was exercised. They're only like numbers that should be going up and to the right as we add in more behaviors, right? And I think there had been discussion in the past about how, okay, once we've enumerated like single, yeah, cool, we've touched the grace termination period, but how does that interact if a pod also has post stop hooks set up, to things fire off in the expected order? So I feel like I've heard this group talk about in the past, I've been out of it for a little while, was the idea that some of us should be going off and actually creating that list of behaviors and enumerating and sorting that list so that we can reconcile. And this has been attempted in the past, right, with spreadsheets or whatever, and maybe we need a spreadsheet for this. I think YAML is another mechanism, but how can we reconcile like this behavior is exercised by this end-to-end test so that we can gradually just check off the list of behaviors? That to me, that list of behaviors is the desired end state. We can use automation for those proxies of behavior, both in like generating things or in measuring what we've covered. But ultimately, I don't know how to tie back to the behavior part without a lot of human effort. And I feel like that can be done independently in parallel from Globant trying to identify end-to-end tests that should be promoted.
Yeah, I think it's on our group and to try and drive a rubric or a framework by which we evaluate this for what we want as the end state. I think we're making good progress with the low-hanging fruit, and we've got a lot of it. We've got enough low-hanging fruit to keep us busy for months, right? But then there will be the point where we need to look past that. And where do we really want to go to? And the answer of where we really want to go to is we have behavioral expectations of what end user consumers want, and to make sure that that's consistent across providers.
Correct.
And,
I think you said something else about like, let's prioritize the most commonly or the most expected behaviors. And my ask in return would be like, what data would we be using to prove that users want this behavior and is thus more important than this behavior? One proxy that Hippie had been looking at was, let's take a look at all of the Helm charts that are out there, and let's take a look at all the resources that those Helm charts use, and let's see which of those resources we do not currently cover in conformance.
yeah,
Some
that's
kind
fair.
of proxy that lots of end users might be using those things. But I'm open to other suggestions on how we like, what do people actually need? What are people using in the real world? How could we get that data to prioritize our behaviors?
Yeah, I think for me, there's two fundamental pieces that Brian touched on already, and that's that the system is entirely dependent upon two behaviors: behaviors of pods, behaviors of watches. Right? Like everything else is kind of accoutrements around it, but we can add the behaviors of the higher order constructs and resources. But like we should totally create the rubric for evaluation, and I think that sounds like it's going to take a while. I think in the meantime, continue on the pod spec work, knowing that we are building automation to help make the project board stuff work cleaner. And to answer your question, yes, we should be doing evaluating optional fields in tests, and that alone will keep you busy for a long time, right? Like that's not going to end anytime soon. So what I'm trying to do here is it's not going to happen overnight, but I'm trying to get the feedback so I know how we can plan to get pieces in place and get folks working in that direction to help get the next set of things ready to go and to make it easier for you over time.
Tim, Dan Kahn here. I thought I heard Aaron asking for potentially some deliverables from Hippie and API Snoop, but I wasn't clear on that. It could be done in parallel with better documentation processes and such, and guidelines on optional fields and everything. But I wasn't quite clear on whether they had actually, whether there was an explicit actionable request there from Aaron.
I can always come up with an infinite work stream for Hippie to do. It's a question of prioritizing what is most valuable and helpful to this group. I feel like the project board automation would be extremely helpful to this group. And I still feel like API Snoop is more of a proxy than we have to measure whether or not we are actually trending in the correct direction. And then I feel like if we are still having difficulty enumerating what behaviors and tests we should be generating or prioritizing, I think that what Hippie has proposed in the past, the use of pod manifests, just manifests in general from Helm charts, could be a useful work artifact from us. But that's sort of the priority in which I'm interested in receiving those things. Does that answer your question?
It does.
So I think I've got the key signals that I was looking for in my ask for this meeting. And I know that Hippie had a bunch of content he wanted to sort of debrief folks on. Are there other questions before we go into that? And I can give the floor to Hippie to go through that stuff. Once, twice, 3 times. All right, the floor is yours if you want to share screen and walk through the details.
Give me just one moment to arrange my screen. make this function.
While if it does that, Tim, do you think that we should have a recurring this kind of meeting where it would help us to sync up, like quarterly or monthly?
I think potentially quarterly for the time being seems totally legit. I think we have more than enough work to do to keep us busy in between this and the next quarter. But I do think that the feedback loop is important. You shared screen and then it disappeared, Hippie.
Let me try again. Share here. Okay. Do we see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Beautiful. We've updated the front page of the repo to have a bit of more info on how to get started and what we're doing. In particular, how to get audit logs in the different areas. We're trying to get that from different groups, and also how to run API Snoop to do the analysis. But as far as specific to this group, there's links in the document that we've shared. This is one of them. And this is without any filters applied, and we're able to pull in from any bucket and from any proud job, and that's been useful in that we're trying to also get the kind folks to merge a PR to start generating audit logs, allowing us to search for different user agents. You'll note that in user agent regex field, you're able to see all of the other user agents rather than just E2E, which will allow us, when we start getting usage, to see behaviors from other applications and other operators to see what they're doing. That allows us to focus on those, and I'll give an example of that later. The next thing is being able to focus on test tags. I didn't have time to prep it for now, but we can also create our own visibility tags that would be in addition to the test tags. So we could create something, for example, for Windows test that also interact with the disk. And then under test patterns as well, this would be a list of all. You could filter to specific tests, so we can focus on that. Over here in, I think this is the next link. This is the user agents that are not E2E. And so you can see all the matches here, that this is CSI, snapshot, or metrics, cluster, kube. And what's interesting here is that this is our release blocking job. This is what everybody ends up testing. We say this is okay, and we only hit 60% of those endpoints, and 37 of them are hit. 37% are hit by conformance tests. This is a good. If we were to look at other applications, my keystrokes are working on. Like the stuff from the Helm charts, this is not behavior yet. This is just endpoint coverage. And then here's another example of searching for SIG node, for example. But again, these tests and test tags means we have to have test. And as Aaron was pointing out, we need to see more patterns going forward, so we can identify, well, what patterns beyond just the user agent can we use to identify, and also the kinds. We talked about focusing on pod and this other behavior, focusing on list. We had looked at the capability of being able to focus on particular Kubernetes objects. And I'd like to get some feedback on whether we think that's of use. That's the documentation. I think that's what I have for the moment. There's the office hours down. I also went through and put together based on the API Snoop document research, what's new in 1.15, and it's those big bold headlines of here's the 4 new tests. There's 3 new tests that were tagged as conformance. So I thought that was interesting. Maybe that's 4 new tests. Why did we get 3 or 4 new tests into 115 conformant right off the bat. And then I thought about automating ways so we can see when we get a new test. Like if we did something like this every time we get together, noting that these are the new things since last week. And we also, so I'm reading back through our notes here. We're looking forward to getting data in from the KIND team and also from the CNF testbed. That should happen soon. And we've made it in the repo, so if you want to focus on different prowl jobs that produce audit logs, we can just update that in the repo, and our CI jobs will pick up that data and present it and process it for us. We're also worked with Globant, and we've been pairing with them a bit to create some documentation on helping to speed tests. Some of that is in our repo, and we've got one of our test writing docs there. The last thing that I wanted to mention is to gauge the interest on a spyglass. Spyglass is the prowl plugin for viewing artifacts from jobs, and it's part of prowl. And we did a quick stake into it to see what that would look like, and found it somewhat useful. But otherwise, that's the GUI portions, and then
I had a real quick question for you. I don't know if you know the answer to this.
Sure.
But what's the delta for keeping the tests wide open versus conformance? So if you looked at the total, just raw numbers of API coverage, because there's currently like over 1,000 tests, conformance covers like less than 200. So what's the delta between the total API coverage for each?
Yeah, I think we just go into, you could do a regex pattern, right? So if we go to the top and we say not something, and we do not, and we put conformance. I typed that right. Regex is fun. Not conformance. So this is all the stuff not tagged as conformance. So that's 210 endpoints. And then if we click up here and change that regex to the conformance, maybe I did that wrong. I don't know off the top of my head, but
yeah, because
when I talked about this at Shanghai last year, it was like there was maybe a 10% delta in the coverage of one of the release blocking jobs. That was all of the non-disruptive, non-flaky, non-feature specific tests. It only gave us like 10% additional API coverage. And the number of test cases is closer to 4,000 at the moment, mostly because a lot of those test cases are different storage drivers, as far as I understand.
Yeah.
Like the thing for me, I feel like is lacking from these kinds of meetings is I would love to see every meeting start off with like, this is what has changed since last time. We've added this many tests. We now have this much coverage. Are we heading in the right direction? And I want to understand if this is useful to this group or not.
I think that's great. I think we should have a follow-up from action items and maybe just a readout of like what's new or what's been updated to keep us honest.
Because I don't know if you do that right now by walking the board to understand like these are all of the PRs we have shepherded in the past week or whatever. But like typically when I have interacted, I've never really been able to pull us out of the level of we're just talking super tactically about individual PRs and individual issues. It would be great to start with what has changed and to see our progress.
Yeah. And also maybe even, highlight, what has not changed. Which is also a good thing to do.
Correct.
This was mostly automated, the way that I produced this. And, I'll see if I can't go through and make it automated so that we can see that difference at the beginning of the meetings.
My other piece of feedback would be, I don't think I know how to get to that specific version of API Snoop that you were looking at, and I would like to know how.
Let me drop it into the doc. It actually is in the doc, but you have to click on the.
Okay, it looks like there's a big old Netlify URI. I'm wondering when like API Snoop.cncf.io or .ci or whatever like is the thing that we can go to look at. That's a lot easier to socialize.
I'll update that today.
Okay, thanks.
We've got T-minus 4 minutes left. I wanted to quick walk through the action items we kind of discussed and make sure that next time we talk, we can actually follow up on those action items and see if we made progress or not. So one of the action items was Srini was going to do the PRs and evaluate whether or not that other automation PR was in place, but at least get the project stuff up to date and work with Hippie on that. There was the PR, there was the issue for me to follow up yet again with regards to guidance on the current set of blocking tests that can't be promoted because of the 2 criteria. And there's the long-term goal of starting to create umbrella issues for us with regards to behavior, as well as like a rubric by which we can evaluate asynchronously and not have to have everyone on a call to sort of understand what makes sense and what doesn't. Is there anything big items that I'm missing here?
I think that is comprehensive. I think we already have a set of umbrella issues. We just have to start adding issues that we open for individual behaviors. Those may not be under the area of conformance, but issues that are going to test behaviors that are not covered or whatnot, right? So everything should go under these umbrella issues we have. If there are missing umbrella issues, please let me know. I'll add them. No track.
Any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Going once, twice, 3 times. For those who don't know, internally inside every organization I ever worked at, I always say whatever special day it is of the day. Today is National Truffle Day, so happy National Truffle Day. And I hope you have a good National Truffle Day.
Go hunt those truffles.
Take care.
See ya.